Would someone be so kind as to shut that door back there, please? Thank you. Good morning, and we'll call to order the meeting of the Regional Transportation Commission. Ms. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Your first item is to conduct your first citizens participation period.
This is the first time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the board on a posted agenda item, now is your opportunity. Good morning, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the board. I'm from Larry Fosgate from the Nevada Clean Energy Fund. And most of you have never heard of it yet, but we hope to have our public coming out sometime early next year. Our primary mission from the last legislature is to facilitate the financing of clean energy use and creation in the state. One of the first things we'd like to do is get the RTC totally electrified. And that sounds like a pretty large order, but I propose that we start the dialogue very soon and start with finding out exactly what the RTC needs, possibly getting a couple of routes on electricity within the next couple of years. And as you start rotating through your buses, adding more and more routes. And I would dearly like to see the RTC totally electrified in 7 to 8 years. And along those lines also, the RTC buildings and the parking lots could generate much of the electricity that you would use on those buses. And with our net metering, a negotiation with the utility would make that such that your utility costs would be brought down considerably. A test was run in California recently of 2 bus routes that were 110 miles long each. The buses were put on it were fully electric. They were fueled by the local utility, which at much higher rates than we pay right here. And their cost savings on those 2 routes was 7 cents per mile, using electricity, buying it at retail. So I think that if we make our own electricity and pay the Nevada rates, your net savings for those electric buses could be 11 to 12 cents a mile. Most transportation companies work on about 1/3 of their budget for fuel. And if you can cut that budget by 10% or more, you've significantly lowered the cost of your operations. So getting the RTC on electricity would be one of our first things. Getting the Clark County School District and their buses would be another. And we'll have several other programs that we'll be looking into trying to get started. But in the meantime, getting started in our talks with the RTC is something that we'd like to do very soon. I'd like you to put that on your agenda very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. On agenda item number 28, Lisa.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. Happy to be here today.
Good to see you.
My name is Lisa DeMarine. I represent Tango Logistics. I'm also the president and CEO of Omni Limousine. Have a long history in the transportation business, about 33 years to be exact. I'm here to speak on the item regarding ride-on-demand service with wheelchair-accessible vehicles. I'd like to thank the RTC staff for collaborating with us on a passion that we've had. I really appreciate their creativity and collaboration. Our company is affiliated with a company in New York City who has provided on-demand service for paratransit for the last 7 years. Started out as a pilot and then became a permanent program. So we sort of modeled that based on that success, but also adapted it to the uniqueness of our market here in Las Vegas. So we're really excited and hope to embark on this pilot with the RTC to provide a service to customers who require ADA vehicles that has never been really offered before. It's, as you know, with TNCs and Lyft and Uber being out there providing on-demand service, there's no ability to provide this to wheelchair accessible customers. We're happy that Tango Logistics has a unique type of TNC where we are ADA compliant. We do drug test our drivers. We do federal background checks. So again, it's a unique opportunity, and we're really excited and passionate, and thus the name Tango, to provide freedom to some customers who aren't as used to having that freedom in the traditional way. So happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Agenda item number 30, Aaron Hill. Good morning.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Aaron Hill. I'm the general manager of the Fanatics Fulfillment Center in North Las Vegas. On behalf of the expanding businesses in the Northgate Business Park, I wanted to thank the RTC for their partnership and their commitment to the growth. Roughly about 17% of our employees currently walk about 2.5 miles to work each way from public transportation. This groundbreaking partnership with the Workplace Connections will go a long way to ensure both the safety and the sustainability of the Battleborn workforce. So again, I'd like to just extend my gratitude to the team at the RTC for their continued commitment.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak during this portion of public comment? Now, when we have the draft report, you will be able to speak at that time. I take it that's why I don't have any cards. Okay, great.
What I have to say is, I hope the public, she told me to write it out there in public.
Would you step, we can't hear you.
Well, she told me to put it in public, but I don't know if it is.
Yeah,
I was just trying to ask, you know how you guys wait till after the half-an-hour period to let us find out what time our bus is supposed to come? Well, after the half-an-hour period, I was told another 20 minutes, so it was 50 minutes late. And if I was able to call when the time it was supposed to be there and told, well, it's gonna be 50 minutes, I could have called my doctor and canceled my appointment because I was gonna be 50 minutes late. So I wanna go back to how you guys were, where you'd check when we ask when it's supposed to be there. You know, you can check then and tell me, because then they would have told me 50 minutes late, and I could have canceled my doctor's appointment or something. If you can go back to doing that.
okay, would you state your name for the public
Candace.
record? All right.
Candace Jamalko.
All right, if we could have a staff member meet on the side here.
Okay.
Thank you for coming down. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board on a posted agenda item? Seeing and hearing no one, will close this portion of public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Your next item is to approve your agenda. Your agenda is in order. We would like to pull item number 38, but other than that exception, it is ready for your approval.
Motion to approve the agenda with changes.
We are pulling or holding?
We are pulling item number 38.
Not to be heard. Correct. There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Your next item is your general manager's report. We have a very quick report for you today. We have a recognition. This month, we'd like to recognize an operator from TransDev, Nancy Phelps. Do we have Nancy Phelps with us today? We do. Come on down. Nancy has been a paratransit call center representative for the past 8 years. Last month, she received a call from a frantic customer who was scheduled for surgery but missed her ride. Mrs. Phelps worked closely with her supervisor, dispatched and the passenger to ensure she would make her surgery appointment on time. She kept the passenger calm and provided her with information regarding her new ride times. Ms. Phelps received a call 2 weeks after the incident from the passenger thanking her for her help. So again, let's recognize Nancy Phelps.
Just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
It's really a team effort. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that concludes your general manager's report. Next on your agenda is to receive the Nevada Department of Transportation Director's report. Director Rudy Malfabon.
Thank you, Tina, and wanted to start out by thanking Tina and the other representatives from the RTC of Southern Nevada that were able to accompany us on a trip to Colorado DOT and met with the Colorado DOT Director, Michael Lewis, and folks from Panasonic who are supporting their efforts to use technology to improve safety and mobility on their transportation system in Colorado. We're looking at a similar effort here. Want to get some more information from Colorado and Utah DOTs as we look into this and possibly bring it to our transportation board for consideration. The federal government has basically funded through December 7th, and we expect that the appropriations bill for transportation will be passed by the lame duck Congress before that time. They're very close on their numbers, their spending levels for surface transportation throughout the nation. We're submitting a federal grant for a bridge grant program focused on rural states, and there's about half of the states that are eligible for that. They're looking at bundling or combining bridge contracts together. We're looking at down here the 515 expressway bridges at Eastern and Desert Inn, possibly being in that hopefully successful grant application. I presented the fuel revenue indexing 2 list of projects to our transportation board. There weren't any concerns expressed. We just mentioned that as those projects advance, they'll be included in your regional plan here, which rolls up into the state plan. The other thing to mention, I wanted to thank the members of the Clark County Board of Commissioners that are on this board for the approval of the road transfer agreement for the Clark County 215 Beltway. A section of the southern beltway from Warm Springs to Stephanie is included in that transfer agreement for portions of Charleston Boulevard, Sahara Avenue, Russell Road, and Tropicana. So it's an agreement that says within 30 days after our board approves it, we'll transfer maintenance responsibilities and permitting responsibilities included in that. And then within 18 months to gather all the legal descriptions of these roads and legally transfer them so that ownership is with the appropriate entity. But thanks again to the Clark County folks, and especially Dennis Cederberg, the Public Works Director, for working with us on this approval process. We're working on a similar agreement with the City of Las Vegas for Summerlin Parkway and hopefully accomplish that before the end of the year. One other good thing to note was NDOT recently received from the court the termination of the consent decree with US EPA on our stormwater program. That was, we had some problems with compliance with the Clean Water Act several years ago. We got basically our budget amended a few years back for additional staff and equipment for maintenance. And I know that this affects all the regional agencies here too that have to do with deal with stormwater issues in your right-of-ways of your streets and highways. So I think it's good news. We didn't have any kind of penalties associated with that other than the initial small amount, but nothing associated with the criteria that we had to establish and put in place to meet the consent decree requirements. So good news for NDOT, and we're pleased to report that we're out from under that consent decree with US EPA. That concludes the NDOT Director's report, and I'm able to answer any questions.
Thank you. Comments or questions?
Very good. Next on your agenda is your consent agenda items, which are items 5 through 37 and may be taken in one motion.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion carries.
That brings us to item number 39, which is to receive an update on the RTC's Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA Paratransit Peer Review Study, and other related paratransit items. And as Deputy General Manager MJ Maynard will introduce that item.
Great, thanks, Tina. Commissioners, I wanted to provide you some background on RTC's paratransit service area before I introduce today's speaker. So the decision to retract RTC's paratransit service area from the 1.5-mile boundary to today's 3/4-mile boundary around our fixed route service area was made in June of 2011. This was done because of the effects of the recession, combined with the increasing costs of providing transportation services for Medicaid recipients. At the May 2011 RTC Commission meeting, the board approved the retraction of the service area to the ADA required 3/4-mile boundary. The retraction only affected new paratransit customers as the board directed staff to grandfather existing paratransit clients to ensure they would not lose their services. Based on recent public comments and at your direction, the RTC undertook the initiative to learn how other transit agencies manage their respective paratransit services, particularly with regard to providing services outside of the ADA 3/4-mile boundary mandate. Today, you will receive a report from Dr. Heather Montero outlining the findings of the paratransit peer review. Dr. Montero founded Hickory Ridge Group, LLC in June of 2016. Leading up to the founding, she taught logistics, marketing, and supply chain management at the university level. Hickory Ridge Group conducts research for multiple industries, including transportation, both freight and transit. Dr. Montero's work has included both public and private sector projects, such as cost-benefit analysis, economic impact analysis, and customer and passenger studies. Dr. Montero's final report will be made available to the public tomorrow, Friday, October 12th, via RTC's website. So I'm going to go ahead and ask there she is, Dr. Montero.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about the update on the RTC's Paratransit Peer Review Survey, which is now complete. So really quickly, we're going to talk about the research questions just to remind everyone where we were going with the study, then discuss the peers exceeding the mandate. For those peers that do exceed the mandate, how they provide the service, how much it costs, and how they fund that service, followed by a brief recap and a list of data-based recommendations that came from the study. So Ms. Maynard gave a great background on ADA. So just to clarify, when we talk about in this study, paratransit service offered outside the service area, what we're referring to is services offered beyond that 3/4-mile ADA mandate. So we will refer to that as both OOSA, or outside the service area, and then beyond the 3/4-mile mandate, just for background. So the first and essential research question is, are RTC's peer agencies exceeding that minimum required service area mandated by the ADA? Second, for those agencies that do provide that service, how is it provided? What is their service provision? How much does it cost for them to provide this service? And then how do they fund those services? So 41 of RTC's peer agencies responded to the question, does your agency provide paratransit service beyond the 3/4-mile ADA mandate? Of those, approximately 54% do not provide that service at the time of the survey. Of those agencies that do provide that survey, about 44% provide service beyond 1+ miles beyond that ADA requirement. So the question becomes, how do they provide that service? In what way is this service provision occurring? This occurs in two general ways. The first one is to simply provide a connection into that within the ADA mandate area, so a shorter connection into the existing service area, or a connection to a fixed route product. So one of the really interesting examples that came through during the interview stage of this analysis was Harris County, Texas. Harris County, Texas provides paratransit connections from outside the service area, and if the passenger connects to any fixed route product within their service area, all parts of that transportation are free. So all the legs are free to the passenger. This incentive has allowed them to keep their paratransit ridership level, which also allows them to have a more stable paratransit budget. So this has been a great benefit to them in both service provision and in terms of funding. The second way that this service is provided by peer agencies is by developing partnerships with other types of organizations. So typically these take three forms. First is with nonprofit organizations, second is with taxi companies, and the third is with transportation network companies, or also TNCs. So the numbers you see next to each of those options represent the number of agencies providing partnerships in that way, just to provide paratransit outside the service area, to be clear. So next to the TNC, what we see is the number one. So that indicates that one agency responded. We utilize TNC partnerships actively and currently to provide paratransit service outside the service area. But once I started the interview process with these agencies, which was the follow-up step to the survey, what I found is that many agencies currently have implemented a TNC pilot or are investigating beginning a TNC pilot. So only one has a current active partnership with TNCs, but many are actually piloting or investigating piloting these relationships. So even though in a few slides we're going to talk about general service caps and limitations, I wanted to bring this one up at this point because it's so unique. This is a unique instance in the data set with Central Ohio Transit Authority. So the challenge of every transit agency is really to provide the most service to as many passengers as possible with a limited number of dollars. And one of the ways that we try to do this is by creating some type of service cap or limitation on certain parts so that we can spread those dollars as widely as we can. So Central Ohio Transit Authority does this in a really unique way. They provide paratransit service outside the service area, non-ADA trips that is, and they cap that at 1,000 trips per day, and that's an agency cap, so not a per passenger cap. And again, this allows control of the financial aspect of funding this service. So once that 1,000 rides has been consumed or reserved for that day, there's no more space available for non-ADA trips outside the service area. So we'll talk more generally about the themes that occurred in the data with limitations and caps, but this was so unique that I wanted to present this in the beginning. So now we'll talk a little bit about each of these types of partnerships. So many agencies are partnering with nonprofit organizations. These typically take two separate forms. The first is for senior mobility programs, and the second being persons with disabilities programs. The commonalities among these programs is these are often nonprofit organizations that provide some type of service themselves to their clients. And as a part of this service, they will provide transportation for those clients to and from the client's home. Most often, this is done irrelevant of whether a passenger is paratransit eligible or not, and irrelevant to whether they live inside or outside that 3/4 mile mandate. So as a good example of this type of organizational partnership, RTC has the Community Mobility Program. And this project currently partners with 5 nonprofit agencies, and RTC is able to, through its RTC local award, to reimburse eligible transportation expenses. This has been a really good program, but the thing to remember is this can be part of the paratransit outside the service area solution, and it is providing paratransit on some occasions outside the service area transportation. But the thing to remember is it's simply for that organization's clients in order to provide the service that the organization provides to them. One of the things to note about nonprofit partnerships is that in the example of RTC's Community Mobility Program, some of these agencies have a wait list. So again, in a moment, we'll talk about those limitations that can be inserted on these types of programs, but at the same time, there are sometimes an operational, what I would call natural capacity limit to these services. So the wait list is indicative of this sort of natural operational cap where the agencies are providing the maximum service they currently can provide, and that's what creates the wait list here. So the next type of partnership is with taxi companies. So even though this is not relevant to the Las Vegas area at this time, many agencies are having a lot of success reducing their paratransit outside the service area cost by partnering with taxi companies. And as a pretty spectacular example, Santa Clara Valley, their cost to operate a paratransit ride outside the service area is $36. When they use a wheelchair accessible taxi for the same trip, they pay $17. So it's less than half the cost to the agency to utilize a wheelchair accessible taxi to provide this service. Most often these taxi partnerships have some type of specific operation schedule, which we'll talk in general when we get to the caps and limitations slide. There also may be caps on the number of taxi rides that are available. These caps can be driven either by agency budget constraints, and they've also been driven from the other side and by the taxi companies themselves. The last type of partnership is the newest, of course, which is the transportation network company partnership. So Uber, Lyft, and we had Lisa from Tango just a few moments ago. This is also finding in the pilot stage lower cost per ride. So Massachusetts Bay, for example, MBTA, during their pilot study, they were seeing savings of about 6% per ride by utilizing a TNC in place of their paratransit operations. Again, we're looking at trip schedules and service caps. So as I mentioned earlier, many of these agencies are actually partnering with TNCs only on a pilot basis at this time. So a lot of the information we have is from those pilot studies. So MBTA, when they first initiated their TNC pilot to provide paratransit outside the service area, they initially capped the rides at 20 rides per month per passenger. When they reached a 6-month review process, they decided to alter that and they changed it to a proportional cap for individual riders. So at that point, your cap as a passenger, as an individual, was capped at your historic paratransit ridership. Broward County in Florida was another example. They capped their rides at 2 rides per day per passenger, so it's kind of a different way to operate the same type of service control. Now, one of the biggest concerns with operating paratransit with TNCs is Title VI. How do we comply with Title VI when we are operating a TNC partnership? And Title VI is telling us that we have to ensure equal access and equal service to individuals regardless of their access or use of computers, smartphones, and credit cards. So the transit agencies who I interviewed who are working with TNC pilots at this time typically have some combination of technology and customer service solutions that they're using to comply with Title VI in those ways. Something else that came up during the interview process is that the TNC partnership is not a solution for every paratransit eligible customer. A particular agency told me that it had been a great success. The TNC program was a great success for their passengers who are vision impaired and their passengers who are mobility impaired that had an easy to stow mobility device like a cane or a walker. So again, we're looking at a type of partnership that can be a part of a program to satisfy this need, but cannot be a standalone satisfaction of the need for paratransit service. So when we think about, again, the transit agency's goal is to serve as many people as possible with a limited amount of funding. And the way that agencies do this is by inserting some level of control on the amount of service that's available to try to spread those dollars as much as possible. So these typically come in the form of trip caps, specific operating schedules, and then some other constraints. Now, something to keep in mind is even though this information came out of this interview process with transit agencies who have these type of partnerships we just addressed, the other thing to remember is that these are decisions that have to be made in terms of providing service for any way that paratransit outside the service area can be operated. So the type of trip caps that emerged from the data, so these became themes in the data, were either per day per passenger trip like we saw with Broward County, per month per passenger trip, and also total trips per day, which was that really unique example in Central Ohio. Then we have certain operating schedules, so specific operating schedules. These schedules might be supplementary, meaning adding on to the hours that the existing paratransit within the mandate is operated, or it might be complementary and working within that same paratransit schedule. And then those schedules also might be limited by partners in total. So one agency that utilizes a taxi partnership, their taxi partner only operates paratransit after 6 p.m. So sometimes these constraints come from your partners and not necessarily from the agency. Other constraints which also represent decision points really no matter how paratransit outside the service area will be operated, is whether same-day service is provided or not, whether door-to-door versus curb-to-curb service is provided, and how many accessible vehicles can be in circulation at any given time. So some of these represent those kind of natural capacity constraints that exist because of assets or infrastructure, like the number of accessible vehicles, and others are those decisions about service, when it can be provided, how it can be provided, to provide the most service to the most people with those limited number of dollars that are available. So next, how much does it cost RTC's peer agency to provide this service? So we take a look at this table. I'll walk through it really quickly just so you understand all the pieces that are in there. The first column represents the cost to the agency to provide paratransit service within that 3/4 mile ADA mandate. That column is provided for comparison purposes. The next column is the cost to the agency to provide paratransit service outside the service area or beyond that 3/4 mile mandate. The third column represents the fare to the peer agencies that they charge their passengers to receive paratransit service outside the service area. And the final column is the difference between the cost to the agency and the fare revenue per ride to provide an idea of the funding subsidy required to provide that service. So that first column, the cost per ride inside the mandate, the minimum there is Utah at about $21 per ride. The maximum is $77 with New York Transit. The next column, they're not matched up, so the minimum inside the service area is not the same as the minimum outside the service area. The minimum outside the service area is about $20, and that's in San Francisco. The maximum is around $46, and that is in Honolulu. So these are the actual fares that they charge. So then what I want you to look at really is the average, because that's what we're looking for. When we look at this overview of what RTC's peer agencies are doing, we're really looking for, in average, what are they doing? So on average, what does it cost RTC's peer agencies to perform this service? So the average cost then is about $35. The average fare charge for that service is about $5. And the remainder, or the subsidy required in funding for each ride, is about $30 for our peer agencies, for RTC's peer agencies. So the final question is, how is this service funded? Many agencies do not separate their budgets or financials for paratransit outside the service area, and sometimes not even for paratransit in view of their entire transit operations. So in this survey, we asked the question, what are the funding sources for your overall transit at your agency? So that's inclusive of fixed, paratransit, and any other modes that the agency operates. This graph represents the number of responses that appeared in the data. It does not represent the quantity of funding received from those sources. So what you can see on the left is over 15% of the responses cited the usual suspects, so federal funds and sales tax. The next highest are fares and state funds at about over 13%. But really, those big chunky categories are not the interesting part of this graph. That tail that goes off to the right is the most interesting information on this graph. What that represents are unique funding sources that one or two transit agencies are currently taking advantage of. So this represents opportunity. This represents areas that RTC can begin looking at as additional funding sources that are not already utilized. So some of these are ad valorem tax, mortgage recording tax, a T&C or taxi surcharge, which two agencies thus far have taken advantage of, and vehicle registration fees. So these become some of those other funding categories that become opportunities for the agency. Now, because sales tax is such a large part of RTC's funding, it became important to also evaluate where they fall amongst the peer agencies in the percent sales tax devoted to transit. So we can see here several other agencies. Now, this data did not come from the survey. This data came from annual agency financial statements that are publicly available. So this also represents, in many cases, multiple measures or propositions that devote a percent sales tax to fund transit. So the highest we have here is King County, and they have 1.9% total sales tax devoted to transit. The lowest is Orange County at 0.1%. At the top, you can see RTC there in yellow, which is about 0.375%. But because we have all these bars, it becomes a little bit difficult to see where RTC falls along the continuum. So this makes it a little bit more simple This graph shows the minimum, maximum, average, and where RTC falls amongst all the peers in terms of minimum, maximum, and average sales tax percent devoted to transit. So also important to note, this is not the quantity or dollars received for transit, this is simply the percent sales tax devoted to transit. So we have the maximum there at the top, 1.9%, which is King County. We have 0.1% at the bottom, which is Orange County. The mathematical average of all the sales tax percent received is about 0.7%, and RTC is roughly between the minimum and the average at 0.375% sales tax devoted to transit. So all of those figures that we just talked about were agency-wide funding sources for all modes operated by the agency. But of those agencies who responded in the survey that they provide paratransit service outside the service area, it's also relevant to ask if they seek specific funding sources simply to provide paratransit outside the service area. 13% of those agencies responded that they do, and when asked for more detail about the specific funding sources, they indicated two groups of funding sources. One was federal funding, which is the 5310 and 5317 programs, and 2 states actually have specific funding programs from which the transit agencies can submit for funding for paratransit outside the service area, and that's Florida and Pennsylvania. So finally, a brief recap. About 54% of the responding agencies do not provide paratransit outside the service area. Of those that do, they largely provide 1+ miles beyond that 3/4 mile mandate. Partnerships are definitely a large part of providing paratransit service outside the service area, but no one type of partnership represented the full solution in this data set. Most agencies are utilizing multiple funding sources, and even when we look at single funding sources such as sales tax percentage, this is typically multiple measures and multiple propositions that fund that. The sales tax percent for transit varies, and RTC is well below the average among peer agencies. And to provide specific funding to provide paratransit outside the service area, the typical programs that are sought are federal and state programs. The final slide is the recommendation slide, and I want to preface the recommendation slide by saying a couple of things. First of all, these data-based recommendations are all with the goal of RTC achieving parity with their peer agencies, which is what the point of this project was, to find out what are the peer agencies doing, what's their average level of performance, how does RTC fit into that, and how can RTC ensure that they reach that average performance level of other agencies. The second thing I want to say about the recommendation slide is these are for suggestion and discussion only. In no way am I suggesting these are the best or only solutions or steps forward. So in terms of reaching parity with RTC's peer agencies, if that is the goal of the RTC, is to reach parity with peer agencies, it would not be suggested at this time to implement paratransit outside the service area. If more data is recommended, which I do recommend, it is possible to conduct a social-oriented benefit cost analysis and economic impact analysis, which would provide more foundational information about how this would implementing paratransit outside the service area versus not implementing it, and how it would affect both the community and the agency itself. Closely evaluate partnership opportunities with other operators if it is desired to provide the service. This includes TNCs. We just talked to Lisa from Tango. That might be a great solution here. RTC, regardless of paratransit outside the service area, should seek new and innovative funding sources. One of the most interesting funding sources that I found was the TNC tax. 2 agencies have inserted a 50 cents per TNC ride within their service area tax that goes directly to funds transit. So that's a really innovative, interesting funding source that could be partaken of. And now I'm open for questions and comments.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner?
Okay, I appreciate all that,
Thank
but
you.
it sounds like the cost is really the driver of the information, and I think we really should have approached it as a social justice issue, and the fact that individuals with disabilities or seniors need to have access. So that's the premise bothers me to some extent. But that said, no place in here do you address any of the issues with the ADA audit that came out, for example. So in order to combine or look at and reflect on, are we over-testing people so that we don't have them have to come into paratransit, therefore it's not accessible, those types of things that come into place. So let me go through a few of my questions here.
Sure.
It's real nice that you want to tax the TNCs, but taxi cabs have had a monopoly in this state, or especially in Southern Nevada. They have a $3 surcharge to do credit cards for like the last 8 years. Take that money and roll it over and give it to paratransit before you start taxing other people, in my opinion. So how much was lost, and this is more to our staff, on our fare collection for, with no disrespect, the city, the free hop-on, hop-off within the loop?
I think we may be displaced by max 100 passengers per day. So if we're receiving $1.06 in revenue per passenger, but that would be max. It's unknown at this time how many folks are actually.
I know you're doing an
But,
evaluation, and I don't mean to just throw
Yeah.
that out there, but if you can give freebies away, which are affecting fare collections, which affect us being able to do service delivery into other areas, including perhaps paratransit, I know that you're supposed to be evaluating what that impact has been on our fare box for not charging people to do the loop. So at some point, I'd like to see what those numbers are. No place did we look at any of the subsidies to Opportunity Village. No place did we look at, you have a cost, what all is included? Can somebody break out what's included in the cost to agency that you keep addressing? What all is included in that? 10 staff, the cost of the paratransit center, what all is included in that cost?
So it's the cost of the contractor, it's cost for fuel, it's administrative cost. And we can send that breakdown to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see a breakdown, and then I want to do it in comparison with your regular ridership. Okay. And then, how is Washoe County handling this if they have a different mode, or does anybody even know?
So they used to receive funding from, they supported some nonprofits. When I talked to Lee Gibson, RTC Washoe CEO, they are looking to discontinue that because of lack of funding.
Okay, but where were they getting their funding?
From, I believe it was just they had some partners, nonprofit partnerships and some state funding, but I'd have to get more clarification on that.
Okay, and then talk to me about Medicaid and why we should not be looking at possibly getting more state support for individuals that would qualify for Medicaid that could go into the transit component.
So we receive 64% of our cost for all Medicaid transportation trips.
And does that all go to paratransit, or does that own, how is that broken out?
It goes into Fund 50. Fund 50 is all transit.
All transit?
All transportation, correct.
So why would it not go to subsidizing paratransit?
Well, everything goes to paratransit first. So because of the ADA mandate, we are not allowed to deny one trip. So all the funding for Fund 50, first and foremost, goes to paratransit. Whatever is left over goes to fixed route.
How would there be anything left over if we wanted to increase or make sure that we're providing for the service area?
It would just depend on the revenue that we're receiving.
Can you get a dollar amount for what that Fund 50 is? How much goes to paratransit versus how much goes to regular then? Let's see. Now, we still give tokens for social services, right? We assist the county, for example.
We are a 50% match for a number of nonprofits, and we receive that. That's local money that we use. It's part of a federal program.
So have we ever explored perhaps providing to those individuals that token system so that they can maybe not use paratransit and be able to access, depending on their disability, even whether they're in social services or not?
Commissioner, I'm not aware of a token program, so I'd have to get smart on that.
No, I'm just trying to think differently of where there are potential.
Are you asking if a paratransit certified person could use fixed route for free? Is that what you're asking?
I know they can.
Oh,
I know,
okay.
But they still don't understand that part, so I
Okay.
don't know if it's, maybe they need to have something in hand to go, oh yeah, I can just go ahead and hop on the regular bus, and that token, in that instance, may not be value of $0 versus someone else that's using a token from social services, which is a value of $4. I just don't know psychologically why some are not using the regular bus, if we just haven't done a good enough job of outreach, or what's there. but just trying to think a little bit differently. Now, we treat people differently versus whether they have to go to the doctor versus to work. And we should be able to know which individuals want to go to work. Is there not some funding mechanism, grant dollars or anything along those lines that we could utilize from workforce development, for example, that could come in to offset for individuals going to work, segregating that group out as another potential
Commissioner,
funding?
yeah, we are not allowed by law, we're not allowed to ask trip purpose when we take the reservation.
I'm thinking that we could have a committee put together that would absolutely be able to put together that so that we don't violate HIPAA or anything along those lines. But just because you're not allowed to ask doesn't mean we shouldn't. And to me, if individuals are going to work, there might be some workforce development dollars that could be utilized to subsidize them at least being able to get to work so we have a lessened impact.
And we have had partnerships with like Workforce Connections and other workforce development agencies. So we could report back to you on what we've got and talk about putting together a working group.
Yeah, if you know you have 20 individuals every month that's going to work to X, Y, or Z 5 days a week, and there's grant dollars or money from workforce
Through other
development, they can
sources,
use
right.
money to make sure people are getting to work, then why would we not link that? Just another thought. Let's see, I apologize.
And Mr. Chairman, when you get a chance, thanks, please.
I'll come back. I can't even read my own notes right now, but I will have some additional
I'll
questions.
give you a breather.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor Goodman.
No. Gives you time to go through it. Anyway, great report, and I love that it's open-ended to give us that opportunity to really explore more, because this is a community of open-ended ingenuity, and that's why we're so fabulous. But really, I guess maybe it's the MJ, but I'm not quite sure. Does the RTC do anything above the minimum mandates of the FTA? For example, do we do anything, well, we do door-to-door service rather than curb-to-curb. I mean, could you just extrapolate a little bit?
So we do, you're correct, we do door-to-door rather than curb-to-curb. We provide, of course, veteran service, free trips for our veterans, which we don't
Free transportation?
Free transportation,
Okay.
medical trips for all veterans and their families. We provide all the senior transportation, of course, which is not mandated by law, so that's something that we care deeply about. And
Now, is that service for that population, is that free as well?
that's free, correct.
As well? Okay.
But we've got a list. There's some things that we do. We try to think about the needs of the community. Top of my head, I can't think about it right now, but I don't have it in front of me. But I'll get that to you.
Terrific. No, I think that really is important for everybody to understand. Because with everything we're doing in the heart of the city, and I'm sure it's true with all aspects of all government in the state of Nevada, we run, or certainly down here, we run on property tax, sales tax. And so as we're always scrounging for dollars, where do we get those dollars from? So we want to serve our population and do it equitably, fairly, and compassionately. But it always, everything, no matter what we talk about, it always comes about availability of dollars. And as you know, yesterday I think the market was down 800 points, probably the biggest in years. And so how does that keep us afloat looking for dollars? So we have to be forever ready for bad news, but we want to serve our population. So I'm a big one, and I know my colleagues up here for sure. If you have ideas on this and you think of ideas that the doctor perhaps in her research has missed, please make sure that you funnel it into our chairman or to Tina or to MJ here, because I think it's critical. We're always looking, how can we really respond to the needs of this, our community, in the best, most efficient way, but realize there's so many other things we have to do with the same dollar. And that's the hard thing. How do you choose? And then what, more importantly, can the individual do? Because I'm a big one. Everything starts with us, with each one of us, to make good choices. And so if you have ideas, please feed them in, and I don't know where you want the ideas to come. Or do you have a general response line on the RTC website?
Well,
No, I gather no.
No, we do, of course we do. We have, but I would say, MJ is certainly the guru and the most closest and most knowledgeable of the program, the restrictions, the FTA requirements, and our peers.
Thank you. Thanks, MJ. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's hear from our citizens, those wishing to speak to the board on this item. Doctor, if you want to sit down, and then we'll bring you back up and we can respond to some of the questions that come up.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Let me get my glasses on. My name is Stephanie Versnick, and I'm speaking before you for the 11th time. Each time I've testified, my message has been the same: restore the service area to the way it was in 2011. I have to say, I was not prepared to speak today because I was hoping that after waiting over 6 months for this peer review study, that it would show the need that people with disabilities have for transportation in this community. Everyone on this commission is familiar with my situation, as I've shared my story several times over the last 11 months. I have come here every month for the last 11 months testifying on behalf of my son and everyone else who is in the same situation. I have a question. What is the purpose of having a citizen's participation? How does this testifying each month change anything? Can anyone on this commission answer my question? What are the other options that taxpayers can have a voice? Someone answer me, because this is not working. Do we not elect you to meet the needs of everyone in this community? People with disabilities' needs are not being met. Are you listening? I'm not going away. I will go to the media if I have to. It's not fair, and it certainly is not right. Let me remind you, the Americans with Disability Act was designed to protect the rights of people with disabilities, to give them access to transportation. Have you listened to the testimonies? People with disabilities are not given access to essential services, such as work, shopping, doctors, visiting loved ones at a cemetery, going to church, or even something simple as going to the post office to pick up a package. What a shame. All of you should be ashamed of yourselves. People with disabilities will remember when you come knocking on our door for your vote. I don't understand how in 2011 we were going 1.5 miles outside the service area, and now we can't do that anymore. Where was the money there? Where did the money come from then? I don't think I'm ever going to get any answers. But I'm not happy, and I'm very upset, and I'm very disappointed.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Davis.
Good morning. That peer review was it was not what I was thinking it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a peer report on how much we need service or how much, what we could do to provide service. This was about financials and things like that. And persons with disabilities deserve more than the consideration of financials and how much it's going to cost and how much it's going to be to do things for us. When we go out into the community, we work, we provide the same taxes, we provide the same input to community as anyone without a disability. These people can go wherever they want. They can move around. They can drive. They can do whatever it takes to get where they have to go. We can't. We need for you as a board to stand up for us. That is your job. That's what you're supposed to do. Stand up for people who have disabilities. Do your job. Stand up for us and make sure that we get what we're supposed to get. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Robin Kincaid?
Good morning. My name is Robin Kincaid, and I have also been here many times to speak with you regarding my daughter. I just want to remind you again, my daughter and I, we live in the service area. That is not the situation that's similar to others here today. But she can't access things outside the service area, which limits her ability, once again, which told you my story about the post office. She couldn't go to the post office. She can't attend a church that's next to the post office. She couldn't visit a loved one at the cemetery, as Ms. Versnick also mentioned. So it's not even the fact that we either pick the right house in the service area or the wrong house outside the service area. We can't go to things that are not in the service area, which is very restrictive. These are essential services that she should have a right. When I'm gone, it bothers me tremendously that she will never be able to go to the post office that she's assigned to. There's just those tremendous difficulties with not having a process to expand the fixed route area. I've come before you and talked many times about that. Last month I talked about maybe looking at a premium way. We have to come up with some solutions. The concern I have too, as was mentioned in the study about these community mobility projects, is those nonprofits that are being contracted with are all providing very segregated programs. So what you're telling us as parents of children with disabilities is that we need to put our kids in segregated type programs. We can't do things like have them go to college or have them work in areas, of course, that are not in the service area. But we have to keep them in these programs, in that thinking, in that culture for their lives. And as a parent of a child with a disability and a community member, I will not accept that. I have to look at opportunities for my daughter to gain new skills and to grow. And that is where she gets further education and competitive integrated employment. So I would urge you to still look at a process to expand the fixed route area and a process to figure out a way to expand outside the service area, even if it's at a premium, but a way to at least have access for persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Shannon, and I'll ask you to pronounce your last name. Is it Nordijk?
Yes, Nordijk. Hello, my name is Shannon Nordijk, and I'm the location manager at Palm Northwest Mortuary. I recently became aware that persons with disabilities are unable to attend funeral services or visit their loved ones because Palm Northwest Mortuary's address is not located within the RTC service area. Access to essential services, such as a place for individuals to spend time and visit their loved ones, is fundamental. The mortuary is located at 6701 North Jones. It's not a new location. We've been there, our cemetery's been there since 1998, and our mortuary since 2006. It is a highly traveled street. The RTC does not have services for the members there. We do have a post office also down the road. We also have a church as well as our mortuary. So we're just looking to be able to help individuals to be able to see their loved ones, to be able to get to other parts of their community as well.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate in this open commentary
Yes,
to make comment?
yes.
Could I ask you, since I know Palm has been here and it was a wonderful service to our community all these many, many years, it it is not a non-for-profit. It is a for-profit entity. Would POM entertain the helping the RTC, and would they in fact make it part of the process of taking care of the remains of those from this world as part of a service that's provided to people who can't access? Would you take that back to the board at POM and say, we need help. We only have so many dollars to do so many things, and we are looking for partners. And POM and other mortuaries certainly might help in the transportation of individuals as they wish to see. So whether it's built into a fee initially or as a donation to the community, I think it would be a magnificent thing for POM and the other mortuaries in the community to do as a consortium. So
Sure.
just a thought.
I will definitely talk to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item?
Good morning. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, distinguished council. For the record, my name is Kenneth Teacher. We hear some emotional testimonies, but I ask you to pay heed to them. It is important. It is vital. People with disabilities do have the same capabilities as the rest of us, and they're vital to our community. They deserve the tools, the same tools as everybody else. Please extend the service area. People with disabilities can get to the doctor appointment, the social, recreational. They can't have friends. Please extend the service area to where it was in 2011 for the independence, for the future, because Las Vegas, we are the fastest growing city and have a lot of tourists and people with disabilities living in our fine city. So, with that, it is important. Please do what's right for people with disabilities, for future generations, for everybody to enjoy. Thank you for your time, and please extend the service area.
Thank you, Kenneth, for your comments. Anyone else from the audience wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we'll close that portion of the discussion. Back to the board. Any other comments or questions? Mayor?
I guess I wish the answer were as simple as just saying we're going to extend the service area. The reality is we have communities in Summerlin and communities in Henderson that get no service. And if we extended the service area, these areas, the RTC would have to then provide services to those areas as well, and probably Boulder City as well. So my concern is that we don't understand the financial implications of this, and to be in denial about the financial implications of this is really foolhardy. Believe me, I would like to be able to provide service to everyone in this community that needs that service, but I think we also need to understand, will this bankrupt the RTC and the service delivery that we provide to a whole community? And that's an honest conversation that I believe we have to at least address as a board.
Commissioner?
Thank you. I would agree. I think, unfortunately, looking just at the service area without looking at integrated programming will never get us to where we need to go as we grow in the valley. I'm hoping still that we get light rail, because then that's a full accommodation for anybody, regardless of whether, and then you have cost savings, but that's down the road. Just a couple other questions. Did anybody look at, or do we accept the IEPs? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I went through the center. Do they accept transitional IEPs from the school district?
Actually, I don't know. I'm not familiar
Can you
with that.
find out?
I
Because
sure will.
here's another blockage that comes into play, and they do it at the university system as well, which I fought for years, haven't been successful, is they make the student and the family go back out and be completely retested to verify that they've actually had a disability, which is a cost factor, it's a bunch of garbage, and especially if their IEPs within 3 years, they should be accepting that and not make them start all over again. And then their transition piece should call out what they need transit-wise, whether you deliver it or not. So I think that that ought to be something we take a look at. In addition, and those young people will be eligible for Medicaid. So then that might be another funding source that we might be able to tap into that gives us a broader group to look at. I will say that the taxis opposed. We actually had a program about 10 years ago. A group of individuals wanted to solely dedicate and do paratransit. They opposed the medallion being issued to them unanimously because it took money out of their pocket, even though they never bothered to come into a residential area or pick it up. So unfortunately, we had that opportunity, and it was kiboshed because of politics. Secondarily, if we grandfathered in, explain to me again, if we grandfathered in people within the 3/4 mile, or do we grandfather within the original service area?
We grandfathered them in the original service area.
Okay, so all the individuals here today that have been speaking either moved outside of that original grandfathering in, or it's, again, we're still being restrictive on the service area rather than what service we're delivering, in my opinion. And maybe that's a different shift that we have to take a look at.
I think it just depends on who it is. I think some folks were never in the service area and still are not.
Some were, some, okay.
And
So
some
it's a little mixture.
were in the service area, moved out of the service area,
Okay.
correct.
And then we don't talk anything about rural access either, and that is a whole nother issue. I'm on the Aging Commission, and so there's a whole nother factor that we ought to be taking a look at so that we're truly, maybe that's where we identify additional nonprofits to serve that rural area that can help with senior citizens as well as disabled as they're aging in place. Or as we're looking at, and this is a whole nother, I'm throwing this out there are impacts to growth. And transit access ought to be one of the impacts that we look at as we're making decisions on approving more density, roadways, housing, not just lack of water, we don't bother to take that into consideration, not just our air quality, we don't bother to really take that into consideration, but we really ought to be including transit and have that as a public discussion and legislatively have that as a discussion. I never got schools included in impact fees, never got anything other than parks, and barely is that covered. So there are some, maybe it's time to have that conversation, especially since we're gonna look at our legislative proposal again. Doctor, could you walk through the potential tax areas again? You said ad valorem. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah, right.
Sure. So some of the other examples were ad valorem tax, mortgage recording tax. Some payroll taxes actually were devoted to transit in part. Let's see, the TNC tax, taxi tax. Those are all off the top of my head right now.
Unfortunately, all that's state level, other than there's a little bit of each of our caps for property taxes, there's not much. And the problem is what that generates as far as the equity piece. Unfortunately, I think I just heard that the state of Nevada is going to be rolling back, fortunately, I guess, for the businesses, Employment Security Division, because their work unemployment piece is lower, so they're going to go back to the base. Too bad we couldn't have maybe a line item of that being reallocated to transit statewide so we can help rural counties as well as our rural areas, Boulder City included. I mean, there are just some things that we should be taking a look at differently. But those other ones are all going to be state mandates, and that's going to be very difficult to be able to get out. Have we explored, or has anybody explored, creating a fleet of wheelchair accessible or accessible vehicles that could be leased out to a TNC or to someone to possibly use so that you've got that vehicle available for individuals?
And that's what we're doing with Tango.
I'm sorry.
That's what we're doing with the Tango car.
The Tango
Yeah,
car.
that helps with the cost. So we're going to be providing all of the vehicles for that program. And we do look for any organization that is a 501(c)(3), we'll donate a vehicle to them as well, anyone that's needed, and they're all wheelchair accessible.
So when we do we have vehicles just as RTC that we redonate. Have we ever looked at just repurposing those and making them wheelchair accessible or handicap accessible before we give it away to others and have that available to folks?
I think the FTA limits us on our ability to do that, but you want to address that, MJ?
Well, Where, again, if they're a 501(c), we absolutely can, and all the vehicles that we donate are wheelchair accessible. If it's a for-profit, if we were entered into a partnership, I think we could work something out. But Tina's right, because we received the vehicles via 80% federal funding, we're very limited as to how we can dispose of that vehicle or
So
give
if
that vehicle away.
donate it to a nonprofit, do you then have an exclusiveness that they have to participate in assisting with moving paratransit?
No.
No. See, that's the thing that we ought to take a look at before you give to a nonprofit, especially maybe you prioritize those 5 currently, and maybe there might be 3 or 4 others that would participate if they had the vehicle available before you give them to other nonprofits that aren't using for the purpose of delivering paratransit. Just another potential way to link things together. But I do think this is not necessarily what I expected, but at least it gives us a talking point to move from. But I do think we need to look at really what service delivery is requested from our constituents versus just looking at a boundary. And then maybe there might be interconnectivities that we haven't pondered, that could assist individuals to be able to expand it up to the southwest side and the northeast side and other places where we don't have bus service, let alone paratransit service at that point. I think those were my... And I want to thank Stephanie and Mr. Davis for meeting with me on the 19th and for RTC staff just to try to brainstorm some additional pieces. I will bring up on the audit, it does say that we have a deficiency in eligibility appeal hearings. I think we finally hired a properly certified hearing officer to actually hear individual cases.
Actually, we had 1, so we have 5 now, and so that deficiency has been
And they're all
addressed.
qualified, unlike
Correct.
the last individual.
Yes.
The appeal process for no-show suspensions doesn't follow requirements. Have we addressed that part of it?
Yes, so we just submitted our
Your response?
our response on the 9th, and we'll bring back to the board next month the results of that.
Because they had an interesting piece about the visitor eligibility. We're talking about our residents, which should be number 1, but visitor eligibility doesn't necessarily acknowledge, apparently, disabilities or available programming that they had in their state while they're here visiting us. Is that what I'm reading correctly?
So just to clarify, Commissioner, anybody that, especially California, all access cards per transit,
Right.
they ride our system for free. So for folks that were just visiting, the FTA said we didn't make it easy for them. So they had to come down to the Bonneville Transit Center to get their card. So we've got to just figure out a way to make it easier for tourists that are just visiting to get that the card so they could ride our services. So we've addressed that as well.
Okay, so they could ride our regular transit.
And our paratransit.
And our
Yeah,
paratransit.
the process wasn't as easy for the tourists as it.
But that's not in our service area, so why would we serve visitors before we take care of our own constituents?
No, this is strictly for visitors inside our service area.
Interesting. That'd be something to track. I'd like to look at that.
Okay,
That's a little
you
bit
got
more. And then some eligibility limitations do not account for lack of sidewalks, curbs, ramps, or other issues for powered. That's probably someplace where we have to hook up with our various public works to make sure that we've got that access.
This had more to do, so back in the day before the MTC, Mobility Training Center, all of our folks that wanted to be certified had to do it in the parking lot of CSN. The summertime was hot, wintertime was cold, and it really wasn't real life. So the FTA would like us to not only continue to use the MTC, but to also bring the clients outside. So now the course they'll travel the MTC, and then the eligibility officer will take them outside, cross the street there, and come back in. So we had to, if you notice in the report, we had to extend the course itself just to kind of mirror a 3/4 mile.
Okay.
So they could extrapolate that. So
Okay.
now they're going to be tested indoor and outdoor rather just indoor.
Okay, and then as Public Works folks from all the entities, hopefully as we're doing our ADA compliance pieces and DOT as well, we're still being sensitive to ramps coming up to where a street light is to push the crosswalk button to make sure that it's not all the way up here so someone in a wheelchair or someone without arms such as Raymond can actually hit the button, because we had some that were installed way too high, and we have people that do that have never had to experience looking at that. So hopefully we've got a program in place to fix
And
that.
Commissioner, you may be also speaking to, the FTA looked at the path of travel. So if somebody in a wheelchair, we needed to get more information from them as to what course, where they may potentially be traveling. because obviously you don't know the conditions of the various jurisdictions and whether the sidewalk ends, that sort of thing. So when we interview the customer that's in a wheelchair and they say they're having a tough time potentially somewhere they go on a Monday, then staff, we're going to go out and look at, we're actually take field trips, get out there and take a look at it to ensure that we are very cognizant of that so that they can become eligible.
Hopefully the county, at least on the strip, are now, because I actually was pushed by a gentleman in his mother's wheelchair from Spring Mountain to Russell and Russell back to Spring Mountain one time, and found a lot of barriers, but those became part of what we did with Commissioner Brown on the barrier, whatever we called that, to get rid of for ADA components, because you never know. We didn't have signage when the escalators were down, and therefore people were trying to push across the street and then find out that they couldn't get there, and the elevators are working. So a lot of that was just common sense stuff, but there were absolutely barriers completed within. All right, thank you. Those are my questions for today.
Thank you. Doctor, a couple questions on page 3. Could you just touch once again on the connections into the fixed or paratransit area?
Yes, so several agencies use that as a way to provide paratransit outside the service area. So, for example, the entire trip would not be done by that service vehicle. It would simply be a connection into the existing paratransit within that 3/4 mile boundary, or for passengers who are willing and able to take the fixed route option, they would connect them to the fixed route option.
And that connection in the review was a no-cost connection?
So one example, in Harris County only, the connection was fare-free on both sides to the passenger if they could take a fixed route product.
And I think you made a very compelling statement, which captures our whole challenge here. And if not quoted, I think your comment as far as we try to provide the most service to the most customers with a obviously limited amount of dollars.
Yes.
And that's the challenge.
That's the challenge for all transit agencies, yes.
It's been the challenge for every presentation. It's the challenge that we hear from our citizens. But it's also, I don't think, and I'll speak on behalf of the board here, I don't think there's any member on this commission, nor at the staff level, that doesn't want to find the solution.
Right.
And I think what we asked you to do has been beneficial. It gives us a sense of where we are,
yes,
and we're doing a pretty good job. We do some things above and beyond the requirements as
yes,
far as the vets and the door-to-door service, and those can't be diminished. It also gives us an opportunity to look at some of the creative ways other people are handling this challenge, because it's not just unique to Las Vegas.
That's correct.
It's our ability to serve every paratransit eligible customer. It's a near impossible feat, because even if we do the fixed route, just expand the fixed route, do we expand it a mile or 2 miles? Is someone in Mount Charleston or Pahrump or the rural parts of the urban area, are they then discriminated because we've only expanded it so much? And,
yes,
there's no easy answers, but I certainly appreciate it. And just I don't know if it's a warning or an omen or the fact is our ridership, primarily due to TNCs, but our ridership as a fixed route system is going down, even with the growth of the valley. And we, as a public agency, will be faced in the very near future of looking at our current fixed route. Do we diminish, do we lessen hours? Do we eliminate routes? So the impact, at least in the foreseeable future, is not expanding the fixed route. We have to take a look at how to make the fixed route more efficient, and that could very well, unless the trends change, that may impact constriction and not expansion. And that certainly, we haven't made any decisions yet, but the way things are trending, that is an additional challenge that has a direct impact on the paratransit. Page, let's see, 4, on some of the agreements, and I think Santa Clara, MBTA in Boston, I'd be more than happy to make a field trip to Boston, Tina. Broward Country. County, can we access those agreements? Can we, you mentioned the agreements that are in place. I'm gonna assume those would be public documents.
So what I have in the report are the full interview debriefs. So all of the interviews that I conducted, I wrote up not an exact transcript, but nearly a transcript. So in the appendices of the report, you can see all of the interview information, and that's where most of that information came from.
Okay. Could we check into some of our peer cities? And just, I'm guessing they're public documents, but if we could get some of those, maybe there's pieces or one that we could incorporate into some potential solutions here. And you referenced a couple times the natural capacity limitations.
Yes.
Speak again on that.
Sure.
I think that's an important point that was kind of missed as far as the report.
So all services will be limited by the infrastructure that's available and the assets that are available to perform that service. And so I just refer to that as sort of a natural cap, even though it's not inserted from the agency perspective, limiting the number of trips, for example. If you have a limited number of assets or vehicles, for example, that creates the cap itself on the service that's available.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you
It
so
certainly takes us to a better place. We will not let up on trying to find some solutions, but the reality is there are some natural limitations on what we as a public agency can do.
Yes.
And as unique as some of our situations are, and they're real,
yes,
they're emotional, and there's probably, I think Stephanie and Robin speak on behalf of many out there that are in the same situation. The challenge is to try to address and resolve as many of those specific, unique cases as we can. But to think that we can, as a board, resolve them 100%, we can't. We literally can't. The other piece that I'd really like to look into is some of these additional funding sources. We are probably limited in where we get our dollars from, but there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't, from a paratransit agency, our revenues and our expenses has to be as transparent as possible. The more we can let people see where the dollars come in and how we spend them, the better off we'll be. At least they may not agree with it, but there's a better understanding of the dollars and the limitations that are there. So we'll continue on this challenge. Sincerely, Councilman.
I just want to make one comment. In all my time discussing with staff has an immense compassion to solve this problem. There's no way they're ignoring any of this. So from my perspective, as Chairman Brown has said, it's complicated, but in no way is there not. And myself, I think the board and especially the staff, I've had conversation with them at some length, and so it's a tough situation, but I want to let everybody know that we're doing everything we possibly can to figure this out.
Mr. Chairman?
Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert? I didn't expect that response. You know, I think today was, sometime light bulbs go on, and Miss Vicky, you've turned on a light bulb in my brain. And thank you very much for coming down and making your comments, because you've opened up something which I don't know if this board and staff can work towards it. But listening to, and I apologize for not getting your last name. I'm terrible with names. Faces, I always remember. Names, forget it. That I remembered Vicky was good. So with that, because of PALM, which could take leadership in getting a consortium of all mortuaries in town to offer transport for free or at a modest rate so people with disabilities can come visit loved ones, that I don't know if this board can move outside the public venue, which I mean, absolutely everything our chairman has said, we are just working with tighter and tighter constraints, and it's not looking good for the future. However, the passion is there. I think we have one of the most magnificent communities, generous to a fault, as long as everything can be monitored and it is legal. How can we work? How can the RTC go out to the public-private sector for a partnership to help us? I know the first thing you have to go to legal, and there are constraints on all public bodies that you can't fundraise, you can't do this, and you can't do that. But is there a way that this body can entertain going out into the private sector in the immediacy of now, today? I mean, they're always, what this body's responsible for is not only for operating today within the confines of the funding available, but looking to the future and how do we continue to plan for the future. I'm a big person on today's very, very important. And so what can I, and I'm talking about the I, all of us as I's, not it's your fault, you're not doing this. What can I be doing? So your statement here today turns something on. And maybe if it's, I know Medicaid works and that's a federal entity, so you have different constraints there. But as we look out there to our community here in Las Vegas, taking the leadership and helping this issue, because everybody in the entire country knows the impact of what's happening with technology. And with that, and Lyft, and Uber, it just constantly keeps the ocean levels up and down, and we're trying to stay ahead and figure. So can you get back to us as to what the RTC can do to encourage the private sector within parameters to help this very, very significant population that, because of the constraints Mr. Brown had stated, might look that we're going to have to pull back, not expand, because we only have so many dollars, and it's insurance, and it's upkeep, and it's paying drivers, and it's benefits, and it's everybody else screaming in every other area that they're not being served. So could you get back to us, please, before I then turn it, or do I go through you, Ms. Quigley, and ask you to ask our legal staff?
There, you're asked. Tag.
Thank you.
So he'll do the research on what our limitations are, but so just to make sure that I understand the idea, you're asking the PALM and their partners, their peers, to form a consortium wherein they would operate a paratransit type service, but RTC would be a partner, or maybe help them subsidize a portion of that.
Well, that's a good idea too, but that's public dollars. No, I'm calling on the private sector.
For them to 100% fund it.
100%.
Okay. All right.
I mean, this to me is why this community is unique in this country. They have a generosity of spirit and are not just constantly blaming everybody and everything's horrible and everything's bad. This is a can-do. Look at the Golden Knights, not this year so far, but look, we came through that horrific 1 October. And we pulled together as a community. We're a fabulous community. So our private partners, as we're beginning to do this cautiously in the private sector, maybe they'd give us a hand here. But I don't know if RTC's constrained, which only legal can tell you, to even ask the private sector to step up, create a body that's doing something. So Mr. Gilbert will figure it all.
Mayor Woodbury. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I don't mean to prolong this discussion, but I do think it's important. First off, I want to say that was one of the best presentations I've ever seen. I think it was very important that we go out and look at all of what everybody's doing across the nation, because they're trying to be creative. They've got ideas. They know what works, what doesn't work for them, and we need to see that. We need to explore those options. And you had a wide knowledge base. I could tell you were prepared. MJ, same thing, answering the hard questions. We've been thinking about this, and we're moving down the road. I do have, just on your recommendations page, I got the TNCs, I got the OOSA, I didn't really get the BCA and the EIA. What are those?
Sure. So as some of the speakers and commenters pointed out, what's presented here is really from the financial perspective and the operational perspective. So asking other agencies what they're doing really with regard to their cost structure and their funding structure. That's really what this study was about, just finding that out. So the questions weren't about the social need. And a social-oriented benefit cost analysis can integrate the social need, the social costs, the social benefits, and provide a more thorough picture that integrates that social perspective with the funding and cost perspective. So that's the benefit cost analysis, and economic impact analysis can be done in a similar way. What's the economic impact to the community by implementing this project or not implementing this project? That's those two.
All right. So, and I appreciate that. Yeah, lots of acronyms in this field.
Yeah,
that's
true.
That's good.
Dr. Montero, I think there's a request for clarification of those two acronyms, just what they mean.
Oh, sure. Benefit cost analysis. Typically, that's done in an engineering setting when you're looking at building a bridge, for example. And you look at benefit cost ratio of building the bridge versus not building the bridge. But you can do this in a socially oriented fashion, and that includes social benefits and social costs that are quantified so that you can actually put them together with the cost and funding scenarios.
All right, so looking at the last, so the only thing I didn't like about the presentation was the first recommendation on here, and that's, and it's not a bad thing, but it says if parity is desired, this is, don't do this.
Yeah.
And that's a fair recommendation, I suppose. But I'm not sure we're looking for parity. I'm not sure we're trying to be the average.
Sure.
Las Vegas is unique, and I think it's our responsibility to try to be above average and try to provide assistance to anybody who needs it. But these other items on here, these other 4 items are giving us suggestions, trying to be creative. How can we find new funding sources? And that's what we actually need to be looking at. The dialogue shouldn't stop here. The testimony that's been given, the public comment, it hits home for all of us, and not just the board members, but all of the public. You guys aren't the only ones that are touched by the needs of disabilities. I have a brother, or had a brother, that passed away a couple years ago. He was more severely handicapped than anybody who's spoken today. Couldn't feed himself, couldn't talk. I have a nephew that has severe emotional and mental issues that he's trying to live on his own right now, and he's getting out there and doing that. And he's used RTC transportation, but he has transportation challenges as well, and others. And I think that's true of everybody. We're all touched by that in one way or another. Mr. Davis, I taught him in 8th grade. I don't know if I scolded him back then. He was a great student. He scolded me a little bit today. I sympathize with that. It's great testimony. We need to hear that. But it touches all of us, and nobody on this board or in this community doesn't want to serve our challenged people. We do, but you can't talk about these things in a vacuum. You can't say, regardless of dollars, we're going to do this, because I didn't hear anybody that stepped up to that podium saying they have dollars, and nobody on this board has said, I have dollars to get, nobody's going to give $1 million. Maybe I'll give $100, or maybe I'll give $5,000, but we need to find creative ways to do this. And, what has been said about what's the acronym? The TNCs, right? The Ubers and Lyfts, they are cutting into RTC's bottom line. We'll hear more about that in the future. But I appreciate Tango being here today, because that's a creative solution that we can pursue. I think it's a great idea where we can partner with these TNCs and find ways to serve these people. The mayor's suggestion about partnering with the private sector, and specifically with Palm, but others. It's going to take the whole community and a lot of creative solutions. There's not just one solution. And dollars, like it or not, we can't do it unless we have dollars. It just doesn't work. And so I like the fact that we're saying the conversation's not over. We don't have a solution today, but if we keep working on it, we may have a solution. And it's, if it were unlimited dollars, we would give unlimited service. It would be the whole service area. We don't have unlimited dollars. So If we can find more dollars, then we'll expand the service area, or we'll expand the services, or we'll have partners that'll help us to expand those services. So appreciate the presentation, and I'd encourage us to keep looking at creative ways to do this.
Thank you, Mayor Woodbury. I would just like to comment, and I think the board knows this, that MJ Maynard, our Deputy General Manager, has gone above and beyond what a lot of the industry has even done so far to create the partnerships that we have. For example, you heard today from Tango, you heard from Fanatics, you know we have a partnership with Lit. So I know she's listening to you, and I know that she will come back to you with, again, more creative programs for trying to do the best that we can with what we have. And I just have to say thank you, MJ, because you've put us on the map at a national level. You are getting a lot of attention for the things that you're doing, and I'm very proud to work with you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you. Just as a wrap-up, yes, our staff is passionate. So anybody in the audience who comes and testifies, it's not falling on deaf ears. Never has, and it isn't. We're just all frustrated, too, on how to make sure that we're really delivering a service. Just as a final, and this is more maybe the staff, I was in Portland last weekend, and, granted, they've got light rail and they've got streetcar and all that part of it, but there's some models there. Years ago, I believe, they negotiated with their union and some of their employers that if their folks rode public transit, there was an offset in costs that they subsidized for doing that. And I don't know if that's still in play or not, but that might be, and again, because our fare box is dwindling, we need to look at where we generate revenue for folks so that we can not just expand, but also integrate our services. So if you wouldn't mind just double checking or seeing if there's, or MJ, maybe that might be yours, but what else is out there that's different that increases ridership so that the money is able to be used in a different variety of ways that we normally would not have used it in?
And Commissioner, we do that. We work closely with the club ride employers.
I couldn't remember what the name of it was. I was saying silver, but that's the senior thing.
But I'll get the stats to you on how, because they don't have to offer subsidies. So, they could pay for the pass fully or subsidize it for pre-tax benefits. So I'll get that info to you.
That'd be good to look at, because in the long run, if a family doesn't have to buy a second car, pay for insurance, there's discretionary income that goes out back into the society. It's your societal issue that comes in. It helps with our air quality, it helps with our congestion. So there just may be a different way, especially now that they're charging for parking. Put that on the list as a potential place to tax. For those that, I'm serious. And I don't mind taking the lead. But there may be some other things that help with the societal side of it, where their employees are better benefited, therefore they see the right to invest in something along those lines. So I just throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor, thank you for everything. To remind the board, the doctor was kind enough to grab the baton during this analysis, and we greatly appreciate your efforts. The report, again, it will be available as of tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. I was told probably early afternoon, sometime in the afternoon.
And that's via our website
RTC,
and/or
yes, RTC
hard
SMB.
copies available for us non-techies.
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Your next item is item number 40, which is to receive an update from RTC staff on the 2019 legislative session, and our Senior Director, Angela Castro, will cover that.
Good morning, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Angela Castro, Senior Director of Media, Marketing, and Government Affairs with the Regional Transportation Commission. I'm here to provide you a very brief update in regards to the 2019 legislative session. I actually have the clicker. Just to give you an overview, the session will begin on February 4th. Right now, 528 bill draft requests have been submitted. In the RTC, we are actively tracking 89 bill draft requests. Something to note is as we look to the 2019 legislative session, we are currently not proposing any new legislation at this time. What we are doing, though, is we've been made aware of potential legislation that we just want to bring to your attention. There has not been bill draft requests yet, and no legislative language has published. The first piece of legislation that we want, the potential legislation that we want to bring to your attention is Laughlin's fuel revenue indexing exemption. The Laughlin Economic Development Corporation is leading an effort to potentially exempt Laughlin from fuel revenue indexing. The corporation suggests that 90% of gas sold to their visitors and residents of Laughlin is purchased across the river in Arizona. The proposed solution is to provide a potential carve-out jurisdiction allowing the township of Laughlin's 5 retail gas stations to be exempt from fuel revenue indexing. Again, there's no bill draft request on this. This is what we've heard. It's been brought to our attention. The next piece of legislation, potential legislation, the next 2 actually are through Southern Nevada Forum, and they've been mentioned as their transportation priorities. The first one is an electric vehicle fee. Through Southern Nevada Forum's Transportation Committee, they are looking to do both a short-term fix and a long-term fix. The short-term fix would be some type of flat fee, is what is being recommended, but again, there's no language. The long-term fix is looking for the commission to study and to explore what are the best practices related to imposing such fees more effectively, such as a vehicle miles traveled option. We have provided in the past research on this topic and will continue to work closely with people who are either, who are supporting this to provide any type of information. The last the last deals with smart communities and also with Southern Nevada Forum, and they want to look at innovation and technology procurement. There's been recommendations, and this one has been really championed by the City of Las Vegas, and we're working very closely with them and the other local governments to better understand the intention. But from what we've heard, there's 2 potential ways of easing existing regulations on procurement for technologies, and they were discussed in Southern Nevada Forum. One was increasing the limits of when competitive bidding is required as it pertains to technology procurement. And the second is adding additional items to the competitive bid exception list. And again, we are meeting on this and looking to see what types of, legislative language is needed. So where we're at today, we're going to continue to closely monitor all legislation potentially affecting the RTC, and we'll continue to meet with stakeholders and business leaders. We will come back to you closer to the legislative session to seek your recommendations. At this time, there is no legislative language, so we are just closely monitoring everything. And that concludes.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you. 2 things. One is, I'm glad to see that they're doing something in electric vehicles. I've been kicking that around for about 5 or 6 years now. So, because they're still on our roadways and still, you don't want to discourage it, but you want to make sure that they're doing it. Plus, there should be some interconnectivity, back to what Mayor March was talking about, is that IT component, so that as autonomous vehicles are in, we actually have the network set up. Do we need anything legislatively still to encourage or require businesses to give us access to move our bus stops back the 5 feet? Now it's just basically voluntary, but we kicked around at one time an idea, and I just don't know if we pursued anything on that. So let's maybe just flag or have a thought process on that, because it really would help, I think, for the safety. It's working well, and some just ignore us because they're corporates or whatever, and they don't want to work with us. Maybe Greg could look at some legal language on that part of it. And then
to clarify, that would be language to encourage and engage private property owners.
I'm saying to require them, they have to give you the 5 feet if they don't want to be encouraged to do it. That he will have some mechanism to be able to trigger, if you've done 3 notices, this request, now we're just going to do it, kind of thing. Because it's really not a loss of much, it's mostly landscape in most instances, so for the safety of our constituents, it might make better sense. And then, that's why it earns the big bucks. Are we afforded, are you RTC local, RTC Washoe, or whatever, when new electeds come in and they're going to choose to be on the transit committee, do you have access to do a training with them to really, and Angela's nodding her head yes, I just don't know what the depth of that is. And first it should be definitely with those on the committees, but you want other people to be familiar with what's going on as well. And I know you reach out on a regular basis. I'm just curious, what's offered?
Yeah, we work with the Legislative Council Bureau, who will whether you're Republican or Democrat,
Right.
if you are on the transportation committee, they will fly you down to both Southern Nevada and or fly you to Northern Nevada. We work very closely with the Nevada Department of Transportation on what we call a transportation day. Well, the last time we started, we take them through projects first, and so at the time, I think it was the Centennial Bowl, there was other projects that were really big. Then we will meet at our FAST Traffic Management Center and do an overview. We also invite sometimes the public works directors and anybody who's interested. So it's really a regional approach, and we have all the different partners who join us in that presentation.
So it's a field trip kind of?
We do a field trip, so it's very hands-on and exploratory. We'll provide the transportation and take them to various different projects, but it's very transportation, transit related.
So with the large percentage of potential new first-time candidates, do we do something before they go to Carson that we would offer, like on board and take them on a field trip around the valley as far as that's concerned?
So we are aggressively actually meeting with potential, whether, even if you're a candidate running, I know Tina and all of us have sat through various different presentations with anyone who's interested. We've also reached out. So whether, we're continuing to move through the list. We'll brief them oftentimes. What we try to do, Commissioner, is have a discussion with them about who we are and what are our priorities down here in Southern Nevada. And we actually will travel to Northern Nevada as well. So we're not introducing ourselves when we go up there. We're now talking about.
I think we should make every legislator know what their bus route number is and ride a bus. I mean, policy decisions should be made by those that actually availed themselves of such. Like mine's number 109 and I do ride it, but I don't know if others do. But there should be an exposure. So maybe we could talk with leadership, Democrat and Republican, and say, there's going to be a required day, you block out a half a day, and you're going on a field trip so that everybody is aware of what's there, what's not there, what's missing, what our challenges are, and it's not always just money. Sometimes it is. I think we've done a great job as a regional group, so we can use that as something to show the collaborativeness of it. Maybe they might collaborate a little bit more on some needs that are there as well. So I just throw that out because it's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We can skip item number 41. We do not have a reason to meet with legal, and move on to item number 42, which is your final citizens participation period.
It's the second time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the board, now is your opportunity.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm John Foster, President Business Agent of ATU Local 1637 here in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's a twofold. We need you, and I believe that RTC needs the drivers. As you know, you probably all watch the news. There's been 2 incidents involving drivers. One was on Eastern, the other one was the other day on the 208. I'm pleading to have more time put on these routes for the safety of the drivers and for customer service. Most times drivers don't make their breaks. It's turn and burn. The young lady that was caught in the seat eating, she probably was eating because she was behind, didn't have time to eat on her layover, because sometimes you don't make a layover. So ATU is pleading with RTC to put some more time on these paddles at the end where drivers could get adequate breaks, adequate bathroom breaks, and then the customer service level goes up with the drivers. If you got a driver that's aggravated, that hasn't eaten, that hasn't went to the restroom, then customer service comes into play. We know you all pride yourselves on customer service. MV prides themselves on customer service. So does Keolis. But we need your help on behalf of all the drivers of ATU Local 1637. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make one comment and maybe clarify that, I've been here coming every month. I'm asking just for my son to get transported to work. I'm not asking for RTC to take him shopping or post office. I mean, I would love for that to happen, but I will continue to take him to his doctor appointments and take him to visit his father at the cemetery and take him to go shopping. I am just asking that he has transportation to go from his home to Nellis Air Force Base at the commissary so he can go to work. As I stated it, he's been there for 15 years. His father is a veteran, 25 years in the Air Force. So that's all I'm asking is for his transportation to work from home.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board? Seeing and hearing no one, will close this portion of public comment. This meeting is adjourned.